Please, don't hit me." The words slipped out of Emily Whitmore's mouth before she could stop them, raw with fear, echoing through the cavernous warehouse. The tall man's shadow loomed over her, hand raised as if ready to strike, his breath hot and sour as he leaned closer. The pen he had shoved into her grip moments earlier clattered to the ground, rolling across the concrete floor between her heels. She hated the tremor in her own voice, hated that she sounded like the helpless girl her father always accused her of being. She was a CEO, the youngest ever to lead her family's logistics empire, yet here she was, cornered in a warehouse after midnight, praying not to be hit like a child. The place smelled of oil, salt, and old wood, an industrial graveyard where container walls towered over her like silent judges. She had come because something didn't add up in the shipping records, a whole line of manifests marked with discrepancies. So she made the reckless choice to leave her penthouse and drive to the docks herself, heels clicking against pavement, silk blouse hidden under a long trench coat. She thought she'd be alone. She thought she could trust her own management. She was wrong. The three men circling her weren't strangers. She knew their faces from boardroom meetings. Mid-level managers who smiled too easily and nodded too quickly when she spoke. Tonight their smiles were gone, replaced with hungry grins. One slapped the folder onto a crate, papers fluttering. "It's simple, Miss Whitmore. You sign, this shipment sails, no questions asked." Her eyes darted over the paperwork, catching the falsified declarations, the doctored weights, the fraudulent destinations. It was confirmation of her worst suspicions, smuggling disguised as legitimate business. She closed the folder with shaking hands. "This is illegal," she said. Her voice was low but firm. "I will not sign." The tallest of the men stepped closer, his voice sharp. "You will, or you'll regret it." His fingers dug into her arm, forcing her back against the cold steel of a container. The metallic clang reverberated around her, making her wince. Her heart thudded against her ribs. She tried to yank her arm free, but his grip was iron. Her throat went dry. That was when the voice came from the shadows. Low, steady, cut through the tension like a blade. "That's enough. If you want to touch her, you'll have to go through me first." The men froze. A figure stepped forward, emerging from between stacked pallets. Donald Johnson, 38 years old, broad-shouldered, his uniform shirt damp with sweat from hours of hauling crates. He was just another dock worker to them, but there was something in his stance that said he was more than that. A Marine once, the kind of man who didn't flinch when danger stared back. His boots echoed across the concrete as he closed the distance, each step measured, deliberate. The manager holding Emily tightened his grip, trying to mask his hesitation. "Johnson," he sneered, "this isn't your fight. Walk away." Donald's eyes, dark and steady, locked onto the man's hand clamped around Emily's arm. He didn't raise his voice, but every syllable was weighted. "Let her go." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The air thickened, the hum of distant cranes and the groan of metal beams filling the silence. Donald's fists relaxed at his sides, but his shoulders squared like a man ready to strike if needed. The pen lay between them on the ground, absurdly ordinary, yet charged with menace. Emily's pulse hammered as the manager's knuckles whitened around her sleeve. She braced for pain. Then, slowly, grudgingly, the man released her arm. The pen skittered further away as his boot nudged it. He spat on the ground. "You'll regret this." Donald didn't blink. "Not as much as you will if you touch her again." His voice carried no theatrics, just quiet certainty. Emily stumbled forward, free at last, clutching her sore arm. She turned toward her unexpected savior, words caught in her throat. Thank you," she whispered, breath ragged. Donald gave her a brief glance, then shifted his gaze back to the three men. His expression remained unreadable, carved in stone. They shuffled uneasily, weighing their odds, then stepped back into the shadows between the containers. The tension broke, leaving behind the sharp tang of sweat and fear. Without another word, Donald motioned toward the open door. "Go," he said. Emily hesitated, her throat tight. She wanted to ask who he was, why he had interfered. She wanted to say she wasn't weak, that she didn't usually beg, but none of those words came. She simply followed him out, her heels striking against the concrete like faint drumbeats in the night. Outside, the port stretched wide, cranes looming over stacks of containers, the ocean lapping darkly against the piers. The night air was cool, brushing her cheeks. Donald stopped at the threshold, scanning the yard, making sure no one followed. When he was satisfied, he turned to her briefly. "You're safe now." Emily swallowed hard. "Why did you—" But he cut her off, already stepping back into the dim glow of the warehouse. "Go home." The finality in his tone left no room for questions. He didn't look at her again. He just disappeared into the shadows he'd come from. A man returning to work as if nothing had happened. Emily stood there alone, hugging herself against the chill. She thought of her father's voice, harsh and dismissive. "You're too soft for this world, Emily." Maybe he had been right. But tonight, when she had been softest, someone else's strength had saved her. Not her board, not her family, not her wealth. A dock worker. A man she didn't know. As she walked to her car parked under a flickering streetlight, her heels clicking against asphalt, the scene replayed in her mind: the raised hand, her own broken plea, and then his voice. "If you want to touch her, you'll have to go through me first." Her chest tightened, not with shame this time, but with something she couldn't name. Relief, gratitude, perhaps even trust. She drove away with trembling hands, headlights cutting through the misty night. Behind her, Donald Johnson returned to his shift, stacking crates as though nothing had changed. But for Emily Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Logistics, everything had. Emily couldn't shake the echo of his words. All through the long drive back to her apartment, the city lights blurring past her windshield, she kept hearing that steady voice. "If you want to touch her, you'll have to go through me first." She had grown up around polished promises and empty threats. But this had been different. He hadn't said it to impress or to intimidate. He had meant it. She barely slept that night. By dawn, she had decided she needed to see him again, to thank him properly and, perhaps, to ask for more than gratitude aloud. The port looked different in daylight. Cranes arched against a pale sky, gulls circled and cried, and trucks rumbled in and out of loading bays. Emily parked her sedan near the entrance, ignoring the curious stares from dock workers who weren't used to CEOs in tailored coats, strolling across oil-stained ground. She spotted him easily. Donald Johnson moved with a rhythm that belonged to men who had carried weight most of their lives: crates, burdens, secrets. His shirt clung to his back, his arms strained as he guided a pallet jack into place. Even among the noise of forklifts and shouted instructions, he carried a silence around him. She waited until his shift break, watching from a distance as he sat on a crate, sipping from a dented thermos. Gathering her nerve, she walked toward him, the heels of her boots tapping too loudly against the concrete. He looked up before she spoke, his expression unreadable but not surprised. "I came to thank you," Emily said, stopping a few feet away. She hated how formal her voice sounded. "You saved me last night. If you hadn't been there—" She let the thought trail off. Donald screwed the lid back onto his thermos and set it beside him. "You don't owe me thanks." His tone was even, almost dismissive. "I do," she pressed. "And I need your help. Those men weren't acting on their own. There's something happening in my company, something I can't fight alone." She reached into her bag, pulled out a set of files she had copied. "I need someone who isn't afraid of them, someone who knows the docks, who can help me find proof." Donald shook his head slowly. "I'm not your man." Emily blinked. "Why not?" "Because I didn't step in for you," he said plainly. "I saw 3 men about to do something wrong and I stopped them. That's all. I don't need your gratitude. I don't want to be part of your fight." His words hit harder than she expected. She searched his face, looking for some crack in the armor, some sign he might reconsider. "But you could make a difference. I saw how they looked at you. They backed down. They were afraid." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "They weren't afraid. They just didn't want the trouble. And me? I go to work, I do my job, I pick up my daughter from school. That's all I have room for." Emily's eyes softened. "Your daughter, Lily," he said simply. The way he said her name carried a weight heavier than any crate he could lift. "She's 9. She's already lost her mother. She doesn't need to lose me because I stuck my nose into something that doesn't concern us." Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice. "But it does concern you. Those shipments go through this port. Those men use people like you, workers who are just trying to get by, to hide their crimes. This isn't just my family scandal, it poisons everything it touches." Donald's gaze hardened. "You think I don't know that? I see things every day I can't change, but I also know when to keep my head down. My daughter needs me alive more than the world needs me righteous." The words stung. Emily felt a flush rise in her cheeks, not from shame but from desperation. "So you'll let them win? You'll let them keep using you, using this place, because you're afraid?" He stood, towering over her, his voice low but firm. "I'm not afraid for me. I've seen worse than those men. But fear is a different thing when you're a father. Every risk I take, Lily pays for it, and I won't gamble her childhood on your company's secrets." Emily swallowed her retort. He wasn't cold, he was painfully honest. She saw it in the lines of his face, in the weariness etched deep by years of carrying more than his share. He wasn't a coward, he was a protector. "I understand," she said finally, though her voice trembled. "But I can't stop. If I don't fight them, they'll destroy me, and they'll destroy this company, my family," she faltered, shaking her head. "I don't even know if I can call them family anymore. All I know is I need the truth to come out, and I can't do it alone." Donald picked up his thermos again, slinging his jacket over one shoulder. "Then find someone else. I'm not the man you're looking for." He walked past her, boots crunching on gravel, leaving Emily standing in the middle of the dockyard with her files clutched tightly to her chest. She wanted to shout after him, to tell him he was wrong, that he was exactly the man she needed, but the words stuck in her throat. As his figure grew smaller against the backdrop of cranes and steel, Emily felt the hollowness of defeat. Yet even in her disappointment, she couldn't forget the way he had looked at her in the warehouse, calm, steady, unshaken. A man who asked for nothing, expected nothing, and owed nothing. That was precisely why she believed he could help her. Donald didn't look back. He crossed the yard toward the employee lot where an old pickup waited, dented but reliable. As he slid into the driver's seat, he caught his own reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment he saw the Marine he had once been, the man who had stood for something bigger than himself. Then he thought of Lily waiting at home, her backpack by the door, her drawings taped to the refrigerator. He turned the key, and the truck rumbled to life. Emily remained by the water's edge, watching the tide lap against the dock pilings, her mind spinning. She knew he would refuse again if she asked tomorrow and the next day. But something in her gut told her he wasn't finished with her story. Neither of them was. She tucked the files back into her bag, squared her shoulders, and headed toward her car. Somewhere deep down, beneath his refusals, Donald Johnson had already made a choice he didn't want to admit, and she was determined not to let him slip away. Donald drove home with the weight of Emily's request pressing against the back of his mind. He had refused her, more than once, and he meant it. He wasn't about to let himself be pulled into someone else's war, no matter how righteous it might sound. He told himself he had done his part. He had stepped in when it mattered, kept her safe in that warehouse, and now it was done. Yet as his old pickup rattled down the narrow streets of his neighborhood, he couldn't silence the echo of her voice or the look in her eyes, that mixture of desperation and determination. He shook his head and pulled into the cracked driveway of his modest apartment complex, the kind of place where paint peeled from the railings and kids played basketball with a dented hoop. It was home. Upstairs, a light glowed from the living room window. Lily was waiting. The moment Donald pushed open the door, he was greeted by the scent of spaghetti with jarred tomato sauce, the best a 9-year-old could make, with a little guidance from her babysitter. Lily came running, her braids bouncing, her smile wide enough to erase the tension from his shoulders. "Daddy!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his waist. He bent down, scooping her up with a grunt, holding her tight. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. After dinner, while Donald washed dishes, Lily sat at the kitchen table with a stack of colored paper, folding carefully. She was quiet, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. When she finished, she held up a small paper boat, its edges neat and precise. With a crayon, she scrawled a word across the side in uneven letters. Hope. She slid it toward him when he sat down across from her. "You like it?" she asked. Donald smiled faintly. "I do. You're getting better every time." "And," she nodded proudly. "I'm making a whole fleet, one for every kid who feels sad. If they have a boat, they won't sink." Her innocence struck him like a blade. He reached out, running a calloused finger along the little boat. "What made you think of that?" She shrugged. "I don't know. I just think people need something to keep them floating. Even you, Daddy." He chuckled softly, though his chest tightened. "Even me, huh?" Lily leaned across the table, her eyes wide with that fierce honesty only children carried. "Daddy, if you see someone drowning, you have to be their life preserver. That's what you always tell me, right?" Donald's smile faded. He looked down at the paper boat, then back at his daughter. He had said those words to her countless times, usually about schoolyard bullies or helping a neighbor carry groceries. He hadn't meant them for battles against corruption, against men who could ruin lives. But hearing them from her now, so certain, so trusting, unsettled something deep inside him. He excused himself, telling her it was bedtime. After tucking her in, kissing her forehead, and whispering goodnight, he lingered by her door, watching as she carefully placed the paper boat on her nightstand like a guardian. The soft glow of her nightlight reflected off the word hope. He stood there longer than he should have, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. Then he stepped back into the small living room, the silence pressing against him. On the mantel sat a photograph in a simple frame. Him in uniform, his arm around a smiling woman with kind eyes. His late wife, Michelle. She had been the one who steadied him when nightmares from deployment clawed at his mind. The one who reminded him that honor wasn't just a word, it was a way of life. She had made him promise, before cancer took her, that he would raise Lily to be proud of him. He remembered her voice, soft but firm. "Live so Lily can be proud." He ran a hand down his face, the words colliding with what Emily had asked of him, with what Lily had just said. He walked to the window and looked out over the parking lot, where a lone streetlight buzzed against the darkness. He thought of Emily standing in that warehouse, terrified but unbroken, refusing to sign her name to lies. He thought of the men who had cornered her, who might try again. He thought of Lily's paper fleet and her belief that no one should sink if someone else could help. Donald sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, his head heavy in his hands. He was a man who kept his promises, and right now those promises were tearing him in two. Stay safe for Lily. Stand up for what's right. How could he honor both? The clock ticked past midnight. He couldn't sleep. He walked into Lily's room once more, drawn by some instinct. She stirred slightly, hugging her worn stuffed rabbit, the paper boat still on the nightstand. Donald sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a braid from her face. "You deserve a father who's strong enough," he whispered. She didn't hear, lost in dreams, but the words carved themselves into his chest. Back in the living room, he pulled on his jacket. His reflection in the hallway mirror startled him. For a split second, he saw not a tired dock worker but the Marine he had once been. Steady, unyielding, unwilling to walk away from injustice. That man had been buried under years of exhaustion and loss, but he wasn't gone. He stared at himself, at the hard set of his jaw, and he knew. Donald Johnson didn't want this fight. He had said no, and he had meant it. But his daughter's belief, his wife's memory, and his own conscience left him no choice. Somewhere across town, Emily Whitmore was probably staring at her own ceiling, wondering how to survive the storm closing in on her. She didn't know it yet, but she wasn't alone anymore. Rain hammered the city that night, streaking down the glass walls of Whitmore Tower as though the very sky had turned against Emily. She sat alone in the corner office that had once felt like a throne and now felt like a cage. Phone calls from board members had piled up all day, each one more hostile than the last. They wanted her to sign the papers, to stop asking questions, to keep the machine running. She had dodged, deflected, bought herself time, but she knew it wouldn't last. Her father's voice had been the worst, cold, commanding, telling her to obey, reminding her of everything she owed to the family name. By the time midnight came, she was shaking with exhaustion, her forehead pressed against the cool glass, staring down at the rain-slick streets below. She thought of Donald, of the way he had stood between her and those men, of the calm certainty in his eyes. He had refused her help again and again, but somehow she knew she needed him. Clutching her coat around her, she left the tower and drove through the storm. The city blurred past, neon signs bleeding into puddles. Her tires hissed against wet pavement until she pulled into a modest complex of aging brick buildings on the other side of town. She hesitated at the stairwell, rain dripping from her hair, her shoes soaked. This was not her world, no penthouses, no polished boardrooms, but desperation pushed her up the steps. She found his door and knocked. It opened after a long pause. Donald stood there in a plain t-shirt and sweatpants, his expression wary, as if he had expected trouble but not her. Behind him, the apartment was warm with the faint smell of laundry detergent and the quiet hum of a small fan. Emily's breath caught. She hadn't prepared a speech, but the words came anyway. "I need your help." He studied her for a long moment, rainwater dripping from her coat onto the floor. "I told you I can't." "You can," she pressed, her voice breaking. "I don't have anyone else. My own family wants me silent. The board wants me gone. They will ruin me, Donald. They will ruin everything. But you," she faltered, eyes locking on his. "You're the only one who stood up for me." Donald's jaw tightened. He stepped aside reluctantly, letting her into the small apartment. She looked around, absorbing details. A sagging couch, walls lined with Lily's crayon drawings, a shelf with battered books, and a few medals tucked into a box. A picture of his wife on the mantel caught her eye, and she felt a pang of guilt for intruding. Donald closed the door behind them. "I told you why I can't. I have Lily. I can't drag her into this mess." Emily turned, her voice trembling but firm. "You already saved me once. Do you think they'll stop now? Do you think they won't come after you just because you walk away? They've seen you. They know you stood against them." His face darkened, the truth in her words cutting deep. He ran a hand over his head, pacing the small living room. "I don't want your gratitude. I don't want to be part of your war. I'm just trying to keep my head down and provide for my daughter." Emily stepped closer, her eyes shining. "But she's the reason you can't stay silent. What kind of world will Lily grow up in if men like that keep winning? Don't you want her to see what courage looks like?" Donald froze. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain drumming against the window. He looked toward Lily's closed bedroom door, the soft glow of a nightlight seeping from underneath. He remembered the paper boat, the word hope written in shaky crayon. He remembered Michelle's voice telling him to live in a way that would make Lily proud. His chest tightened. Finally, he turned back to Emily. His voice was low, heavy with resignation. "All right, but if I step into this, there's no turning back. You understand that?" Emily nodded, relief and fear mingling in her eyes. "I understand, and I swear to you, I won't let this destroy you. We'll fight smart. We'll fight together." Donald let out a long breath, as though releasing the last of his resistance. He extended his hand, calloused and steady. Emily hesitated only a second before placing hers in it. Their hands clasped, sealing something larger than either of them could name. Outside, the storm raged on, but in that small apartment, a fragile alliance was born. Donald Johnson, the man who had sworn to keep his head down, and Emily Whitmore, the woman determined to expose the rot in her own family, stood on the same path now. It would be dangerous. It would cost them more than they could imagine. But in that moment, as the thunder rolled over the city, both knew there was no other choice. For Donald, it wasn't about Emily's company or her family's fortune. It was about the promise he had made to his daughter, the promise to be a man she could be proud of. And as Emily looked at him, soaked and exhausted yet unyielding, she felt for the first time that she might not be alone in this fight. They released hands, but the weight of that moment stayed between them like an unspoken vow. Whatever came next, neither could walk away. The next morning, the storm had passed, but Donald felt its shadow clinging to him as he drove Lily to school. She hummed in the passenger seat, swinging her legs and tracing raindrops on the window, oblivious to the heaviness that pressed on her father. He forced a smile when she kissed his cheek and bounded toward the school doors, her backpack bouncing. He watched her until she vanished inside, his chest tightening with the knowledge that agreeing to Emily's plea had just placed both of them in the crosshairs. On the way back to the port, Donald tried to focus on the familiar rhythm of work, the grind of forklifts, the clank of chains, the smell of diesel and salt. But nothing felt routine anymore. Every set of eyes lingered too long. Every shadow between containers seemed to hide danger. He moved pallets, nodded to coworkers, but tension coiled tight in his muscles. It didn't take long for the first warning to arrive. He was walking back from the loading bay at dusk, the sky painted with streaks of orange and purple, when two men stepped into his path near the parking lot. They weren't dock workers. Their pressed jackets, polished shoes, and hard expressions marked them as something else entirely. One leaned against Donald's truck, idly tapping a crowbar against his palm. The other flicked a cigarette into the gutter, crushing it beneath his heel. "Johnson," the one with the crowbar said, his voice smooth but edged with threat. "You've been making yourself noticed. That's a problem." Donald stopped a few feet away, setting down the lunchbox he carried. His stance was relaxed, but his eyes stayed sharp. "I do my job. That's it." The man smirked. "Last week you stuck your nose where it didn't belong. Our friends at the warehouse? They're not happy. You think you're some kind of hero?" He stepped closer, lifting the crowbar until it rested against Donald's chest. "You're not. You're a man with a daughter, and accidents happen to little girls every day." The words hit harder than any blow could. Donald's fists clenched, every instinct screaming to knock the man flat. But he held himself still, his voice steady. "Stay away from her." The second man chuckled. "Then stay away from Whitmore. Forget what you saw. Forget her. Go back to hauling boxes and minding your business." The crowbar tapped against Donald's chest one last time before lowering. Both men slid into a black sedan, tires hissing as they pulled away. Donald stood there, breath tight, watching until the car disappeared down the street. He forced his hands open, flexing his fingers to bleed off the rage that burned in them. He bent, picked up his lunchbox, and climbed into his truck. But when he gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles stayed white. That night at home, he couldn't hide his unease. Lily chattered about a spelling test and a game of hopscotch, waving her arms in excitement. He tried to smile, to nod, but his thoughts were fixed on the men's words. After she went to bed, he sat in the darkened living room, staring at the door as though expecting it to burst open. The paper boats Lily had left on the coffee table caught the faint glow from the streetlight. He picked one up, the word "hope" scrawled in her hand. He closed his fist around it, not crushing it, but holding it tight like a lifeline. Meanwhile, across town, Emily was fighting her own isolation. The board had begun closing ranks against her. Her calls went unanswered, her emails intercepted. Assistants who had once rushed to fulfill her requests now avoided her gaze. In meetings, her father's allies cut her off, dismissing her concerns with patronizing smiles. The pressure was suffocating. At night, her phone buzzed with messages she didn't dare ignore, anonymous threats warning her to keep quiet. She found herself looking out her office window, scanning the streets below, half expecting danger at any moment. When she met Donald the following evening at a diner off the highway, both looked like they hadn't slept. Donald sat across from her in a booth, his broad frame dwarfing the cracked vinyl seat, nursing a black coffee. Emily pushed her food around her plate without eating, her hands trembling slightly. "They came after me," Donald said finally, his voice low enough not to carry. Emily's head snapped up. "What do you mean?" He told her about the two men, the crowbar, the threat against Lily. His tone was flat, controlled, but she saw the fire burning behind his eyes. Her breath caught. "Oh my God, Donald, I'm so sorry. This is my fault." "No," he said firmly, "it's theirs. And if they think scaring me will make me back down, they don't know me very well." Emily reached across the table, her hand trembling as it hovered near his. "But your daughter—" "She's why I can't quit," he interrupted. His eyes softened for a moment, then hardened again. "If I let them win, what do I tell her? That we hide from bullies? That we keep our heads down while corruption eats everything around us? No, she deserves better." Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight. She wanted to tell him she admired him, that she trusted him more than anyone in her life. But all she said was, "Then we keep going. Carefully, we find proof, enough to bring them down." He nodded, the decision sealed between them, but both knew the risks had multiplied. The enemy wasn't hiding anymore. They had shown their teeth, and the bite could come at any moment. As they left the diner, rain began to fall again, a thin drizzle streaking the windows and slicking the pavement. Donald walked her to her car, his gaze sweeping the lot, every shadow suspect. Emily slid into the driver's seat, hesitating with her hand on the door. "Be careful," she whispered. Donald gave a curt nod, but his eyes betrayed the storm brewing inside him. He watched until her taillights vanished, then turned toward his own truck. His jaw was set, his body tense. The threats had changed the rules of the game. They had made it personal. On the drive home, his thoughts circled endlessly. He had chosen this path reluctantly, but now there was no turning back. His daughter's safety, Emily's survival, the truth itself, all were bound together. And somewhere in the darkness, men with crowbars and polished shoes were waiting for him to slip. Donald tightened his grip on the wheel. He wouldn't slip. He couldn't. The port was never quiet, not even at night. Steel cables groaned, waves slapped against pilings, and the steady hum of diesel engines filled the air like a heartbeat. Donald moved through it all as if part of the machinery, blending with the flow of workers, his expression unreadable, but his mind was sharp, alert, cataloging every detail. Tonight wasn't about earning wages. Tonight was about finding proof. Emily had given him a list of suspicious shipments, dates, and container numbers. It was risky to chase them, riskier still to be caught with a phone in his hand, but if they were going to expose the corruption strangling her company, they needed evidence no one could dismiss. He pushed a pallet jack past a row of stacked containers, pausing when he reached the numbers on her list. The manifest said these boxes carried auto parts, bound for South America. But Donald had been around long enough to know the weight wasn't right. He set down the jack, slipped his phone from his pocket, and snapped a quick photo of the identification plate. Then another of the shipping seal. He listened. Forklifts beeped in the distance. Men shouted. Chains rattled. No footsteps near. He crouched and ran his fingers along the edge of the crate. A faint smell clung there, chemical and sharp, nothing like engine oil, drugs maybe or weapons. He didn't want to guess. He snapped one last photo and stood. That was when the light shifted. Someone was coming. Donald tucked the phone away and grabbed the pallet jack, moving quickly, blending back into the rhythm of work. Two supervisors walked past, laughing, cigarettes dangling from their lips, never looking twice at him. He kept his head down until they were gone. His pulse slowed, but his determination hardened. He would need to be smarter, quicker. One wrong move, and the men who had threatened Lily would know exactly what he was doing. The next evening, Donald met Emily in a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place with neon buzzing and the smell of grease clinging to the air. She sat in a corner booth, nervously stirring a cup of coffee that had gone cold. When Donald slid into the seat across from her, she looked up, relief softening her face. He pulled out his phone, laid it on the table, and showed her the photos. These are from last night. The manifests say auto parts, but I've been moving boxes long enough to know those aren't engines inside. Emily leaned closer, her fingers trembling as she swiped through the images. This is exactly what I suspected, she whispered. If we can match this to the records I've been collecting, we'll have something solid, but we need more. We need proof of what's actually inside. Donald frowned. Breaking a seal will get me noticed fast. I know, Emily said quickly. I'm not asking you to open them. Just get as close as you can. Anything. We have to build a case. Donald leaned back, his gaze steady. Do you understand what you're asking? The more I dig, the more dangerous this gets. They already came after me. Next time, they won't just talk. Emily's throat tightened. She reached across the table, her hand hovering near his but not touching. I know the risk, but if we don't do this, they'll keep smuggling whatever it is, drugs, weapons, who knows, and they'll keep using my name to cover it. Donald, I can't fight them without you. For a long moment, he said nothing. The jukebox in the corner sputtered to life with an old country tune, filling the silence. Finally, Donald nodded once. Then we do it careful, my way, no mistakes. In. Over the next week, Donald worked like a shadow, slipping between shifts, memorizing schedules, learning which guards lingered where, which supervisors liked to take smoke breaks, and when. He snapped photos of documents left carelessly on clipboards, photographed barcodes on crates, and once, when no one was watching, pressed his ear against a container. Inside, he heard the faint rattle of something that definitely wasn't machinery. Each piece of evidence added to the growing pile he sent to Emily. But the closer he got, the more the walls closed in. Twice he caught men watching him too closely. Once he returned to his truck to find a knife stuck into one of the tires, a silent warning. He changed the tire without calling attention, but his jaw clenched with every turn of the wrench. He was running out of room to maneuver. Emily did her part, cross-referencing everything he found with financial records and shipment logs. Her apartment became a war room, papers spread across every surface, red circles and notes scrawled in her handwriting. When Donald dropped by one evening with a fresh set of photos, she barely looked up before motioning him to sit. "This is it," she said breathlessly, pointing at a line on a document. These crates were declared as replacement engines, But the weight matches narcotics shipments seized last year in another port. They're moving drugs, Donald, through my company, with my family's approval. He exhaled slowly, his eyes narrowing. Then we have them. She looked at him, her eyes bright but haunted. No, we almost have them. What we've got now, they'll call it circumstantial. We need undeniable proof. Donald rubbed a hand over his face, fatigue pulling at his bones. Proof means getting closer. Closer means they'll smell me out. And if they do, he trailed off, thinking of Lily asleep in her bed, of the crowbar tapping against his chest. Emily's voice softened. I know what I'm asking, and if you want to walk away, I won't blame you. Donald stared at her for a long time. He thought of his wife's photo, of Lily's paper boat with hope written across it, of the promise carved into his soul. Slowly, he shook his head. I'm not walking away, not now. Emily's shoulders sagged with relief, but she didn't smile. She knew the weight of what his words meant. She closed her eyes briefly, whispering, "Thank you." Later, Donald drove home through quiet streets, his headlights sweeping across shuttered storefronts and empty sidewalks. He parked and sat in the truck for a long while, staring at the glow of Lily's bedroom window. He could almost hear her voice. "Daddy, if you see someone drowning, you have to be their life preserver." He let out a long breath, gripping the steering wheel. Tomorrow he would go back into the lion's den. Tomorrow he would take another step toward proof, toward danger. For now, he climbed the stairs and slipped into his apartment. Lily stirred in her sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her paper fleet lined neatly on the nightstand. Donald kissed her forehead, whispering a promise she couldn't hear. "I'll keep us both afloat." The knock on Donald's door came on a quiet Saturday evening, just as he was setting a pan of cornbread on the table. Lily had been humming to herself while arranging napkins, her excitement over their simple family dinner filling the apartment with warmth. Donald opened the door expecting a neighbor, maybe the mailman dropping something late, but instead found Emily standing in the hallway with a hesitant smile. She was dressed simply, her usual tailored armor replaced with jeans and a sweater, her hair loose and damp from the drizzle outside. She held a small paper bag in her hands, shifting it nervously. "I hope I'm not intruding," she said softly. I needed a break from everything, and I wanted to thank you." Donald studied her for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was small, its walls lined with the signs of everyday life, Lily's drawings taped near the kitchen, a stack of laundry folded on the couch, a battered bookshelf crammed with novels and photo albums. Emily's eyes lingered on the mantel where Michelle's picture stood, framed simply but reverently. She set the bag down on the table. "I brought pie," she said, almost apologetic. "Apple, from the diner." Lily's eyes lit up. "Pie? Daddy, she brought pie." She hurried over and tugged at Emily's sleeve. "You can eat with us, right?" Emily laughed softly, kneeling to Lily's height. "If your dad doesn't mind." Donald shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "We've got enough cornbread to share." Dinner was simple but hearty cornbread, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes with too much butter. Emily ate slowly, watching the easy rhythm between father and daughter, the way Donald leaned down to listen when Lily spoke, the way Lily teased him about putting too much pepper on his chicken. It was a world far from boardrooms and hostile board members, but it felt more genuine than anything Emily had known in months. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't looking over her shoulder. She was simply present. After dinner, Lily darted to her stash of colored paper. "Do you want to learn?" she asked Emily eagerly. "I can show you how to fold boats." Emily hesitated, then nodded. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside Lily, watching as the little girl's fingers moved with practiced ease. "Like this," Lily explained, creasing the paper sharply. Emily tried, fumbling with the folds, her boat collapsing into a crooked mess. Lily giggled. "Your corners are too loose. Hope needs to be strong to float." She handed Emily another sheet. "Try again." Emily laughed, the sound surprising even herself. She folded carefully, following Lily's instructions, and finally managed a lopsided but recognizable boat. She wrote the word hope on the side, her handwriting elegant and neat. Lily grinned. "See? That one will float." Donald watched from the couch, his arms folded loosely across his chest. He saw the light in Emily's face as she laughed with Lily, the way her shoulders relaxed in a way he had never seen before. For a fleeting moment, the exhaustion and danger of the last weeks felt far away. He saw not the embattled CEO, but a woman who had been carrying too much alone. When Lily grew sleepy and Donald tucked her into bed, Emily lingered in the living room, holding her paper boat. She looked around at the cozy apartment, at the photo of Michelle, at the worn furniture that somehow spoke of stability. "She's wonderful," Emily said softly when Donald returned. "Lily, she's so bright. You've given her something I never had growing up." Donald leaned against the doorframe, his expression guarded. "What's that?" "Safety," Emily answered, her voice steady but wistful. "A place that feels safe. My parents gave me money, expectations, a name that carried weight, but never this." She gestured toward the apartment. Never warmth, never hope taped to the walls. Donald's gaze softened, though he didn't let it show fully. "It's not much. It's everything," she whispered. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sound of rain outside. Emily looked down at the boat in her hands. "I don't know how you do it. Hold on to this. Hold on to hope when everything tries to crush it. End." Donald's voice was low, almost a growl. "You don't hold on to it. You fight for it, every day." He shifted his stance, uncomfortable with how much he had said. Emily lifted her eyes to his. "And you think I can fight them? My own family? The board? They've already isolated me. I feel like I'm drowning, Donald." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the small room. "Then don't fight alone." Her breath caught at the quiet conviction in his voice. He wasn't promising miracles. He wasn't even promising victory. But the words steadied her in a way nothing else had. For the first time since the threats began, she felt the possibility of standing her ground. The moment was broken by Lily's soft voice from the bedroom. "Daddy?" she called sleepily. Donald excused himself and went to check, leaving Emily alone in the living room. She looked at the paper boat again, her reflection bent across its surface. A woman born into privilege, now leaning on the strength of a man who lived paycheck to paycheck. It was ironic, but it felt right. She whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "Don't let me sink." When Donald returned, Emily rose to leave. At the door, she turned back. "Thank you, for tonight, for letting me see this part of your life." Donald nodded. "Don't thank me, just be ready. This isn't going to get easier." Emily met his gaze, her jaw tightening. "I'll be ready." She stepped into the hallway, the paper boat tucked safely in her coat pocket. As Donald closed the door, he stood in the quiet, staring at the picture of Michelle on the mantel. He thought of Lily's words about hope, of Emily's confession of feeling drowned. He wondered how much longer he could keep them all afloat. Then he turned out the light, the weight of tomorrow pressing on his shoulders. The warehouse was quieter than usual when Emily slipped inside, her heels muted against the concrete floor. She carried a clipboard, hoping it would make her look like she belonged there, but every step felt like a trespass. The information Donald had gathered pointed her toward this particular shipment, and she was determined to see it with her own eyes. Her heart pounded as she moved past the stacked containers, their looming bulk casting shadows under the dim yellow lights. She kept telling herself she needed to do this, that without direct evidence, she would never be able to expose the corruption. But the unease prickling down her spine told her she was walking into danger. She was right. The sound of footsteps closed in from behind. Before she could turn, rough hands grabbed her, yanking her into the narrow space between two towering containers. Her clipboard clattered to the ground. 3 men surrounded her, the same supervisors who had once cornered her before. One pressed a hand over her mouth, the other shoved papers toward her. "Sign it," the tallest demanded, his eyes cold. "Sign, or you don't leave this place." Emily shook her head, muffled cries escaping against the hand covering her mouth. Panic flared, but beneath it was anger. Anger at being treated like property, at being forced to carry her family's sins. She kicked out, connecting with a shin, but the man only growled, tightening his grip. The edge of a blade flashed near her face, its glint under the warehouse lights making her stomach twist. "One signature," the man hissed, "or we'll make sure your pretty career and your life are over." The knife pressed close enough that she could feel the chill of the steel. Emily's breath came in ragged bursts. She thought of her father, of the board, of every voice that told her to sit down and obey. She thought of Donald, of Lily's little boat with hope written across it. Her eyes squeezed shut. "Please, let me survive this." The crash of metal broke through the suffocating moment. One of the containers rattled violently as a figure burst out of the shadows. Donald moved with the speed of a man who had lived too long on reflex, his fist slamming into the side of the knife wielder's jaw. The blade clattered to the ground. Emily stumbled back as the grip on her loosened, gasping for air. The fight erupted in chaos. Donald drove his shoulder into one man, sending him crashing against a crate. Another lunged at him with a length of chain, swinging it wide. Donald ducked, the chain whistling past his ear, then countered with a sharp elbow to the attacker's ribs. Pain flared across his side as the third man tackled him, fists pounding, but Donald twisted, flipping the man over with the kind of brutal efficiency that only came from years of training. Emily pressed herself against a container, frozen as the violence unfolded inches from her. Sparks flew as the chain struck steel. A container door slammed shut with a deafening clang, and Donald grunted with the impact of each blow. Blood streaked his temple, but his movements never faltered. He fought like a man with something more than his own life on the line. The tallest man scrambled up, grabbing the knife again, lunging toward Emily. Her scream cut the air. Donald spun, lunging forward, his hand locking around the man's wrist. With a twist, he forced the blade free and sent it skittering across the floor. His fist followed, a brutal punch that sent the man crumpling. For a moment, the warehouse fell silent except for Emily's frantic breathing and Donald's ragged exhales. "Are you hurt?" Donald asked, his voice rough but urgent. Emily shook her head, her body trembling. "No, I know." Donald pulled her close, scanning the shadows. The other men groaned on the floor, too dazed to rise, but he knew reinforcements could be near. "We need to go, now." He guided her toward the exit, his hand firm at her back, every muscle tense as he kept watch for more threats. They pushed through the warehouse doors into the night, the cool air hitting their faces like a rebirth. Rain had begun to fall again, streaking down Donald's bloodied cheek. Emily turned to him, her voice shaking. "They were going to kill me." "Oh." He didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes." Her throat tightened. "If you hadn't—" "I was close," he said simply, cutting her off, his eyes steady on hers. "I wasn't going to let them." The certainty in his tone undid her. Tears blurred her vision, but she blinked them away. She couldn't afford to be weak, not now. Still, she couldn't stop herself from whispering, "Why do you keep saving me?" Donald looked past her, out at the rain-slicked dock stretching into darkness. "Because someone has to." "Oh." Emily stared at him, the words sinking deep. He didn't say it like a hero, didn't want recognition or gratitude. He said it because it was truth, plain and undeniable. Donald wiped the blood from his forehead with the back of his hand, wincing. "They won't stop. You need to be ready for that." "I know," Emily said, her voice steadier than she expected. "But tonight I felt what they really are, monsters hiding in suits and titles, and I swear, Donald, I won't let them win." "Ho-day." Donald met her gaze, a flicker of something like respect in his eyes. "Then we fight smart, together." They stood there in the rain, battered but unbroken, the warehouse behind them holding nothing but shadows and lies. For Emily, the terror of nearly dying crystallized into resolve. For Donald, the blood on his hands was another reminder of the danger closing in, but also of the vow he had made to his daughter to be the life preserver for those drowning. And tonight, that meant Emily. As they walked away from the warehouse, Emily's steps grew firmer. She glanced at Donald, the paper boat still tucked in her coat pocket, and whispered to herself, "Hope floats." Emily sat in her office, staring at the family crest embossed on the wall behind her desk, the gold letters spelling Whitmore like a curse. The rain from the night before still clung to her memory, mingled with the image of Donald bleeding as he fought to keep her alive. Her reflection in the polished glass window looked fragile, eyes red, hair disheveled. She had survived, but the cost was unbearable knowledge. Her own blood, her own family, had sent those men to silence her. It wasn't just corruption hidden in paperwork. It was betrayal born in her lineage. She picked up her phone and dialed her father's number, her hands trembling. He answered after 2 rings, his voice smooth and detached. "Emily, you're making quite a mess of things." Her throat tightened. "It was you," she said quietly. "You sent them, my own family." Silence stretched before he responded, not denying, not even ashamed. "You forced our hand. We gave you every chance to do what was right for this company. Instead, you fight us. And yes, if that means cleaning up our own mistakes, we do what must be done. You'll thank me someday." Emily's breath caught in disbelief. "You call that protection? You call attempted murder a correction?" He sighed, weary as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. "You always were too soft. You think justice keeps the lights on? That morality pays the bills? No, power does, and you either protect it or get crushed by it." The line went dead before she could answer. She lowered the phone, numbness washing through her. When Donald arrived later that evening, his head bandaged from the warehouse fight, he found her pacing the length of the office, her heels tapping like a drumbeat of rage. She turned when he entered, eyes blazing. "It was them, Donald. My family. My father. They're the ones who ordered it." He nodded slowly, not surprised, though his jaw clenched with quiet anger. "You needed to hear it yourself," he said. "Now you know." Emily sank into her chair, her hands shaking as she rubbed her temples. "I've spent my life trying to prove I deserved this seat, that I wasn't just a spoiled daughter inheriting a crown, and all along, they've been using me as a shield for their crimes. I thought I could fix it from the inside, but I see it now they'll never let me." Donald sat across from her, his presence solid, grounding her. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You can bow down, sign what they put in front of you, live with your wealth and their approval, or you can stand up, fight back. But if you stand, you'll lose things you've never imagined losing." Emily's eyes filled, her voice breaking. "I'm so afraid, Donald, afraid of losing everything, afraid of losing myself." He reached across the desk, not quite touching her hand but close enough to feel the tremor in hers. "You're allowed to be afraid. Courage isn't about not fearing. It's about standing anyway." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with the weight of choice. Emily swallowed, forcing the words out. "Then I'll stand. Even if it costs me everything, I'll stand." Tears welled, but she blinked them away, her jaw firming. Donald studied her, and in her eyes he saw the same spark he once saw in his brothers in arms, men who had chosen to face impossible odds because the alternative was worse. He leaned back, wincing as his ribs ached. "They'll hit harder now. They'll use everything: money, power, lies, and they'll make you feel alone." She met his gaze. "I'm not alone." Oh. Donald looked down briefly, a muscle ticking in his jaw. He thought of Lily, asleep at home, her innocence untouchable for now. He thought of Michelle, her voice whispering through memory. "Live so Lily can be proud." He looked back at Emily, her face pale but resolute, and he knew he wasn't just in this fight because he stumbled into it. He was in it because walking away was no longer an option. Emily stood, her hands trembling but steadying as she gathered the files Donald had given her. "We'll need to move quickly. They'll try to discredit me, bury me under lies. If I go public, I need proof that can't be erased." Donald rose too, his silhouette broad against the office light. "Then we find it. No shortcuts, no half measures, the kind of proof they can't bury, no matter how deep they dig." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, fragile but real. "Do you believe we can win?" Donald's eyes darkened, steady. "I believe justice isn't always fair, but it's worth fighting for. And hope always floats." Her breath caught at the weight of his words. For the first time, she felt not just the burden of her family's betrayal, but the possibility of something beyond it. Betrayal had shattered her illusions, yes, but it had also stripped her bare, leaving only the truth. And standing beside her in that truth was a man who owed her nothing, yet gave her everything she needed: courage to fight. She looked out the window at the city below, lights flickering like stars scattered across wet streets. "Then let's bring them down," she whispered. Donald nodded, the set of his shoulders carrying the weight of the decision. They both knew the storm had only begun, but together, for the first time, they felt ready to face it. The days that followed moved like storm clouds gathering over open water, slow at first, then darkening until the sky itself seemed ready to split apart. Donald felt the shift everywhere he went. At the port, whispers followed him like shadows. Supervisors paused when he walked past, their conversations cut short, their eyes sharp with suspicion. Even men he had worked beside for years grew quiet, uneasy, as though merely standing too close to him might draw fire. He kept his head down, but inside he knew the noose was tightening. At home, He tried to shield Lily from the tension. She worked diligently on her fleet of paper boats, now nearly covering her desk, each one carefully labeled with a name or word. "This one's yours," she told him one evening, holding up a slightly crooked boat with DAD scrawled across it. "It's strong. It won't sink." Donald swallowed hard, his throat tightening as he took it from her. "I'll hold on to it," he promised, and placed it carefully beside Michelle's picture on the mantel. Lily beamed, not knowing her simple creation had become his anchor in a sea threatening to pull him under. Emily, meanwhile, was under siege in her own tower. Anonymous emails flooded her inbox, threatening to expose fabricated scandals. News outlets began whispering about her instability, about supposed erratic behavior and reckless leadership. One morning she walked into the boardroom to find her chair already occupied by her cousin, a smug smile on his face as he spoke of transition planning. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood at the head of the table, eyes sharp, voice steady. "I am still the CEO. If any of you intend to remove me, you will do it publicly. You will put your names to the betrayal." They shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding her gaze, others meeting it with cold defiance. Emily left the meeting with her head high, but inside she felt the walls pressing closer. Donald met her that night in the same diner where so much had begun. He slid into the booth opposite her, his body aching from another day of heavy work and heavier watching. Emily's face was pale, but her eyes were aflame. She pushed a folder across the table. "They're moving faster than I expected, fabricating stories, planting evidence, even arranging for a vote of no confidence next week. I can't stop them alone." Donald flipped through the documents, photographs of shipping manifests and financial trails she had pieced together. His fingers tightened on the pages. "This is enough to raise questions, but not enough to end it. They'll bury this with money and lies." "I know," Emily admitted. "But there's one shipment left, leaving port in 2 days. It's the largest yet. If we can intercept proof of what's inside, they won't be able to explain it away." Donald's jaw tightened. "And if we don't?" Her voice lowered, almost breaking. "Then they'll destroy me, and they'll come for you and Lily too." The weight of her words hung heavy. Donald thought of the men with the crowbar, of the knife glinting in the warehouse light. He thought of Lily's laugh, her small hands folding paper, her trust in him to keep her safe. He thought of Michelle's eyes in that old photograph, her unspoken demand that he live with honor. Finally, he closed the folder and looked straight at Emily. "Then we don't miss." The night before the shipment, Donald couldn't sleep. He sat by Lily's bed, watching her chest rise and fall in the rhythm of innocent dreams. On the nightstand, her paper fleet seemed to glow in the faint light, the word hope written 100 times in childish scrawl. He touched one gently, whispering to himself, "For you." His reflection in the window showed a tired man, scarred by loss and hardened by labor. But beneath that weariness was resolve. The next day, Donald moved through the port like a ghost, watching the target container from a distance, memorizing the guards' patterns, the timing of inspections, the moments when eyes turned elsewhere. Emily remained nearby, waiting in her car with a burner phone, her nerves stretched taut. She kept glancing at the clock, her palms damp. If they were caught, the fallout would be catastrophic. But if they succeeded, everything could change. At dusk, Donald saw his opening. 2 guards stepped aside for a smoke break, leaving a narrow window of opportunity. He strode forward with practiced nonchalance, clipboard in hand, looking every bit the weary dock worker. He scanned the container's ID, his heart pounding. Just as he reached for the camera hidden in his pocket, a voice barked behind him. "Johnson." He froze. One of the supervisors, flanked by 2 men in dark coats, was striding toward him. The man's eyes narrowed, suspicion sharp. "What are you doing here?" Donald straightened, holding the clipboard up casually, checking manifests, same as always. The supervisor stepped closer, his smile thin and dangerous. "Funny. You've been checking a lot of things lately, things that aren't your concern." Donald's pulse thundered, but his expression didn't waver. "Just doing my job." "Re?" The men circled him, one brushing deliberately against his shoulder. The tension was suffocating, the threat clear. Donald's hand hovered near the pocket where the camera waited, the proof they needed only seconds away. But he knew one wrong move here would mean not just his own downfall, but Emily's and Lily's safety as well. The breaking point had come. The men circled Donald like wolves, their movements slow and deliberate, designed to intimidate. The supervisor's smirk deepened as he tapped the side of the container with his knuckles. "You think you can sniff around forever and we wouldn't notice?" he asked, voice oily with menace. Donald held the clipboard firmly, willing his face to remain calm. "I think I'm late for my shift," he muttered, attempting to move past them. A heavy hand slammed into his chest, halting him mid-step. "Not so fast," one of the men growled. The narrow strip of dock between the containers became a trap. Donald's mind raced. If he fought here, the cameras might catch him. If he ran, he'd draw even more suspicion. But standing still was the same as surrender. His hand tightened on the clipboard, prepared to use it as a shield if he had to. Then a horn blared from the far end of the dock. A forklift veered dangerously close to the group, its driver waving angrily at them to move aside. The distraction was just enough. Donald stepped back, slipped into the flow of workers rushing to avoid the machine, and vanished into the crowd. He kept his pace steady until he rounded a corner, ducking into the shadows behind a stack of containers. Heart-pounding, he pulled out the small camera, quickly snapping the photos he needed. The shipping seal, the ID number, the inspection stamp. Proof. He shoved the camera back into his pocket, just as footsteps echoed nearby. The supervisor's voice carried, harsh and frustrated. "Find him. He's here somewhere." Donald crouched lower, the smell of rust and salt sharp in his nostrils, sweat running down his neck. He waited until the voices faded before slipping out the far side and disappearing into the maze of steel and machinery. When he finally reached his truck, his hands trembled against the steering wheel. He drove to the rendezvous point, headlights off until he saw Emily's car waiting beneath the shadow of an old billboard. She jumped when he slid into her passenger seat, his clothes damp with sweat, his face lined with tension. He handed her the camera without a word. Emily's hands shook as she scrolled through the images. Relief flooded her features, followed quickly by fear. This could be enough. But they're on to you now. They'll tighten the net. Donald leaned back, exhaling slowly. "They already did. I barely got out." He turned his head to her, his eyes steady. "Next time, I might not." In pain, Emily's chest constricted at the weight of his words. She wanted to tell him to stop, to save himself, but she knew it was too late for that. They were bound to this fight now, by choice and by circumstance. "Then we use what we have," she whispered. "We strike before they can bury us." The following day, Emily called a press conference. The board tried to block her, sending frantic messages, demanding her silence. Her father's voice thundered through the phone. "You will regret this, Emily. Do not defy me." But she hung up, her hands trembling as she stood before the podium. Donald watched from the crowd, hidden among reporters and onlookers, his broad frame blending into the sea of strangers. Emily's voice rang through the microphones, steady despite the storm inside her. She revealed the evidence, the shipments, the false manifests, the financial discrepancies. She spoke of integrity, of betrayal, of refusing to be complicit in crimes that stained her family's name. The room buzzed with murmurs, questions shouted, cameras flashing. For a moment, it felt like victory, but Donald's instincts screamed otherwise. He scanned the room, catching sight of two men in the back, their eyes fixed not on Emily but on the exits, their posture coiled. Danger. He moved closer, weaving through the crowd, his gaze locked on her. As Emily stepped down from the podium, the crowd surged forward, reporters shoving microphones in her face. The men in the back began to move, cutting through the throng. Donald's heart pounded as he closed the distance. Emily turned, searching for him, her face pale beneath the bright lights. "Donald!" she called, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Then it happened. One of the men lunged forward, his hand reaching inside his jacket. Donald reacted on instinct. He barreled through the crowd, grabbing Emily's arm and yanking her aside just as the man drew a weapon. Shouts erupted, cameras caught the flash of steel, and panic tore through the room. People screamed, scattering in every direction. Donald slammed into the attacker, the two of them crashing to the ground. The gun clattered across the floor, kicked away by the frantic rush of feet. The second man lunged at Donald, fists swinging, but Donald met him head-on, trading blows in the chaos. Emily was shoved against the wall, Her breath caught in her throat as she watched the man who had saved her again and again fight for their lives in front of flashing cameras and screaming witnesses. Security finally surged forward, tackling the assailants, dragging them away in handcuffs as reporters snapped photos with wild fervor. Donald rose slowly, blood streaking his cheek, his chest heaving with the effort. Emily rushed to his side, grabbing his arm. "Are you—" "I'm fine," he cut her off, his voice rough. His eyes swept the chaos, then locked on hers. "But this is it. They won't stop. You exposed them, and now they'll come with everything." Emily swallowed hard, her eyes wide with both fear and determination. "Then we brace ourselves." Donald nodded grimly. He knew the fight had reached its reckoning. They had taken their shot, and the enemy had answered. The breaking point had passed. Now came the storm. The city buzzed with chaos after the press conference. News anchors replayed the footage of Emily's speech and the attempted attack in an endless loop, the words, "Whitmore scandal," plastered across every screen. For once, the truth was no longer hidden in dusty ledgers or whispered in shadowed boardrooms. It was shouted across headlines and broadcast into every living room. But with exposure came danger. Emily's apartment was swarmed with reporters, her phone vibrating with threats, her email hacked and flooded with vitriol. She had expected pushback, but not the tidal wave of fury that followed. Still, she didn't regret it. For the first time in years, she felt unshackled. Donald, however, carried the weight differently. He moved like a man expecting every knock on the door to be the last. At night, he sat by the window of his apartment, the glow of the streetlight painting his tired features. Lily slept soundly, clutching her paper rabbit and surrounded by her fleet of boats. He stared at them often, their fragile forms reminding him of the fragile line he walked. He whispered promises into the darkness, that she would be safe, that he would stand until he couldn't anymore. The reckoning came sooner than either of them expected. 2 nights after the conference, Emily called Donald in a hushed voice. "They're meeting tomorrow," she said. "My father, the board, the men behind the shipments. They're going to decide how to bury this, how to bury me. It's happening at the old terminal on Pier 17. If we get evidence, if we can record them admitting it, this ends." Donald didn't hesitate. "Then we'll be there." The next evening, the terminal loomed before them, abandoned except for the faint glow of lights spilling from its interior. They parked 2 blocks away, slipping through shadows, the salty air sharp in their lungs. Donald led the way, his movements quiet and precise, a soldier slipping back into familiar territory. Emily followed close, her heart pounding but her resolve solid. Inside, the echo of voices carried through the cavernous space. They crouched behind a stack of crates, peering toward the far end where a long table stood beneath a hanging lamp. Around it sat Emily's father and several board members, their tailored suits gleaming in the dim light. Papers were spread across the table, along with photographs of shipments and ledgers marked with numbers. Emily's father's voice cut through the stillness. "The girl has become a liability. We should have dealt with her sooner." "Har." Emily stiffened, her nails digging into her palm, but Donald's steady hand on her shoulder held her in place. He slipped the recorder from his jacket, setting it low on the crate to capture every word. Another man spoke, his tone cold. "We can move the shipments through the southern ports. The evidence she brought forward won't hold without context. By the time anyone looks deeper, it will be too late." Emily's father nodded, his face a mask of control. "Then it's settled. But make no mistake, if Emily continues, she is finished, family or not." The words twisted like a knife in her chest. Donald glanced at her, saw the tears shimmering in her eyes, and gave a small shake of his head. "Stay focused," he mouthed. She swallowed hard, nodding. Just as Donald reached to retrieve the recorder, a crate shifted behind them with a groan. Emily froze. The sound had echoed, loud enough to draw attention. The men at the table paused, their heads snapping toward the noise. One barked, "Who's there?" Footsteps thundered closer. Donald acted instantly, grabbing Emily's hand. "Run!" They bolted through the maze of crates, boots pounding against the concrete as shouts erupted behind them. A gunshot cracked, sparks flying as a bullet struck steel inches from Emily's head. She gasped, but kept running, Donald pulling her toward a side door. They burst into the night, lungs burning, the chill air slicing against their skin. Donald shoved Emily behind a shipping container, his back pressed to hers as more footsteps spilled into the yard. "Stay low," he hissed. He peeked around the edge, spotting armed men fanning out, their flashlights slicing through the dark. The recorder was still clutched in his hand, evidence enough to destroy them if they could survive the night. Emily clutched his arm, her whisper fierce. "We can't let them take it." "They won't," he growled. The next minutes blurred into chaos. Donald moved with lethal precision, striking from the shadows, disarming one man, dropping another with a swift blow. Emily stayed close, ducking low when bullets ricocheted off metal. Fear clawed at her throat, but she refused to freeze. She spotted a dropped flashlight and hurled it across the yard, drawing attention away long enough for Donald to take another man down. Finally, they reached the truck. Donald shoved Emily inside, slamming the door as gunfire erupted behind them. He peeled out, tires screeching, bullets pinging off the frame as they sped into the night. Emily clutched the recorder to her chest, shaking with adrenaline. Donald's hands were steady on the wheel, his eyes hard, focused. Only when the city lights swallowed them did Emily allow herself to breathe. She turned to Donald, her voice hoarse. "We have it. We have everything." He nodded, eyes still on the road. "Then we finish this." End. The following morning, Emily walked into the federal building with Donald at her side. Reporters swarmed the steps, shouting questions, cameras flashing. She held the recorder high, her voice steady. "This is the truth, and I will not be silenced." Donald stayed one step behind her, his presence a shield. Inside, investigators took the device, their faces grim as they listened to the damning words of her father and the board. The case would unravel publicly now, layer by layer, until the men who had built their empire on lies were dragged into the light. That night, back at Donald's apartment, Lily placed her strongest boat in Emily's hands. "This one won't sink," she said proudly. Emily held it gently, tears brimming. Donald watched them both, his chest heavy with something like peace. For the first time, the storm seemed to be breaking. He looked at Michelle's photo on the mantel, then at Lily's sleeping face, then at Emily clutching the paper boat. He whispered to himself, "We stayed afloat." And in that quiet, battered apartment, under the soft hum of the night, hope truly did.